Hi, and welcome to another edition of Probeline, brought to you by the good folks down at the Aspen Thrift Shop. Today we're interviewing Adam Frisch, who would like to represent you in the 3rd Congressional District. My name is Reid Haughy. My co-host is Ann Mullins, and we'd like to start with Ann talking to you a little bit about how to vote, because the important thing is to get out and vote.
Thanks. These interviews are so important, but even more important is voting. You can still register. You must be 16, you have to be a citizen of the U.S., and only have lived in Colorado, for 22 days before the election. So this may just be the last day, one of the last days you can register. You can register online or on your phone. At pitkinvotes.com, there's a lot of helpful information. There's a sample ballot there. You should have received your ballot by this time. If not, contact Pitkin Votes and make sure you get your ballot. Early voting has begun. Election day is November 8th. And as I said, you can mail it in, but you have to do that soon. You can drop it off or vote in person. Voting service and polling centers, Pitkin County Administration Building, and the Sheriff's Office through the 6th. And then on voting day, Pitkin County Administration Building, Jewish Community Center, Snowmass Village Hall, Basalt Regional Library. They're all ADA accessible, and they're all open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So please vote. So now let's talk to Adam. So, Adam, how is it going? And tell me a little bit, tell me how it's going, but also for the viewers, can you talk a little bit about the district, which is one of the biggest districts. Yeah. Give us the details,
It's great to be back in the hot seat, Aspen's Meet the Press. But thanks, everyone, for everything that you guys are doing. Colorado is going to have 8 congressional districts. We had 7. We're getting an 8th district because of our population growth from the census. That 8th district is being battled down in northeast Denver. But for CD3, which is us, it's one of the largest districts in the country that's not a single state. It's larger than the entire state of Mississippi. It's about 50% of the state of Colorado's geography. Every one of these 435 congressional districts in the country has about 700 to 750,000 people. That's kind of how it's broken up right now. And our district is very diverse. I start having the conversation with the district. You go 2 hours south of Denver and you are in Pueblo. 150,000 people. It's the largest city community in the district. They don't like to call themselves rural like everyone else is. They're very proudly blue-collar, working class. They've had a 150-year-old steel mill out there. The vast majority of the railroad ties across the country are coming from there. And a great story, which you can get in later, that steel mill is 90% solar-powered right now. It's the only one in the world. Okay. It's a really great story. But then we go all the way down to the New Mexico border, and we go actually now about 50 miles to the east, not quite to the Kansas border, but pretty close, Otero County, La Junta. And then we have about 4/5 of the New Mexico border, all through the San Luis Valley, Alamosa, we go to Pagosa Springs, and then we end up in the Four Corners, which is, Cortez is kind of the hub, 2 tribal lands down there, the Utes and the Southern Utes. So again, 4/5 of the New Mexico border. Then we go the entire gamut of the Utah border, and you have Grand Junction, which is pretty much the hub of the western slope, if you will. That's our 2nd largest city. We have 100,000 people there. Actually, the next couple cities after 100,000 is Durango, Montrose, that have somewhere in the mid-20s, and then we have Glenwood Springs. And so we get all the way up to the northwest corner of Colorado, and that's where you have Moffat County, Rio Blanco, and that's about 1/3 of the Wyoming border. A lot of natural gas, a lot of oil, a lot of coal, energy production, some of the best hunting in the world in the fall. It's a big economic driver and identity up there as well. And then and we have Aspen and Telluride and Crested Butte for kind of our 3 ski towns in this district. But the vast majority of the district is incredibly rural, and a lot of ag and a lot of ranching, and it's diverse. Demographically, it's about 25% of the voters are Democrats, 31% are Republicans, and 43% are unaffiliated. I think Colorado has about 40% unaffiliated, which is our fancy word for independent.
Right.
And so it's a diverse, but the unaffiliateds are kind of the majority party, if you will, in CD3.
That's great. So 750,000 in that area. That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And how many counties? Do you know?
We have 28 counties.
Okay.
Half. Well, 27 and a half, 28. So Eagle County, we have Cottonwood Pass and over for our district. So basically the basalt aspect of Eagle County is CD3. When you get into the Eagle Valley, the Eagle drainage and Eagle and Vale, that is now part of Vale, Fort Collins, and Boulder, and that's represented by Joe Neguse, of which Joe Neguse is going to win 15 points or 16 points. It's an incredibly safe blue district.
Okay. And I think one of the big questions, you live in Pitkin County, you've been elected in Aspen. Pitkin is different than a lot of the other counties in this district. So what's your strategy? How are you understanding the problems, and how are you relating to the people in the other
and so I knew
areas?
when I looked at this race about a year ago, Representative Bobart made some comments. I can't remember what they were. She's made a lot of worse ones probably since. But I looked at his demographics about this 25D, 31R, 43 unaffiliated, and I looked around at some of the people that were already in the race. And my view is that it's the district is R8 or R9, which means there's 8 or 9 more Republicans percentages. Like, Joe Biden lost this district by about 8 points or 9 points, and so I thought that the only way that a non-Republican had a chance to win was going to be a pragmatic, pro-business, moderate Democrat, which I knew the Democratic Party, that wasn't exactly what they were looking for in the primary, and they certainly weren't looking for a fairly successful, straight white male to do this either. And so that was a conversation I just owned up as well. And then on top of those, I love my town. I'm proud of the town I've been living in for the past 20 years, but of the 500 communities we have in this district, it's probably the worst one to be from. And show up and say, I'm here from Aspen, and I'm going to try to help and represent you all. So one of the reasons I've done 20,000 miles on the road, and we're about to do a 3,000-mile, 100-stop, 11-day tour, is because when I get in front of people, they understand that I'm a normal human being, and I actually have good listening skills. And I spent my first 5 years on the Indian reservation in northeastern Montana. My dad was in the public health service. My mom was involved in the local education system. I grew up in Minneapolis. I did some ski racing. My dad grew up in the mining town of Virginia, Minnesota. And my great-grandfather on my mom's side came over from Europe and opened up a cattle trading business, which turned into a grain elevator that my cousin runs now. And so I have some non-Aspen aspects in it. But no, without a doubt, there is skepticism about that. But I do tell them, kind of what we do, and until 2 years ago, affordable housing was really just kind of this resort community conversation. And now I'm in Alamosa, I'm in Walsenburg, which is 3,000 people, and everyone's having conversations about affordable housing. Even some of these towns are having conversations about short-term rentals. And so when I tell people that this community started working on this in the mid-'70s, and I started working on this in 2009, 2010, there's an appreciation, maybe begrudgingly so, that some of the conversations I can have with people in the more traditional rural communities, they're facing some of the issues that we've been trying to manage for a long time. There's obviously different solutions given the economic disparity. We have some of the poorest counties in the state, in our district, and so we have this disparity politically as well as economically, and trying to keep all that together and being a good listener has been really important. So that's how we're resonating.
Okay. Do you want to?
It's interesting to hear you talk about how you have to represent or present yourself in this large district, but why are you running? What motivated you to run?
So the current representative motivated me to run for a couple of reasons. One, when Ann and I served on city council, ironically, I was always like, people ask me, how do you like being a politician? I'm like, I'm not a politician. This is elected community service. I'm doing elected community service. I did that for 8 years. And then a couple months later, my wife got on the school board, and she's the president of our school board. She's doing elected community service, as all those moms and dads are in the school board. And most of the people in the county, even at the county commissioner level and the city council level, people are standing up to try to do the right thing for people. And I just looked around, and she made these comments, and there's two things that I took away. One, sadly in today's politics, people assume if you're really loud, you must be electorally strong, right? And I looked at these races, and I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and Paul Gosar and a lot of these brand name Republican extremists, and there's some loud ones on the left as well, but let's focus on these ones on the right. They all had 65 to 75% wins in 2020 in the general election. No matter what happens, none of them can lose. I doubt they're going to lose. Lauren Boebert only got 51% of the vote in 2020. She didn't win her home county. Those that know her most don't care for her, and a lot more people know her now than before, and not for good reason. And now, to be fair, the district, we used to have Steamboat in our district, and that went away to kind of where Vale and Fort Collins and Boulder are. And we picked up some more conservative districts. So we were what was called R5. We're now R9. So my kind of analogy is, in an R9 district, if a Republican cantaloupe runs against a Democratic cantaloupe, the Republican cantaloupe's going to win by 9 points. But cantaloupes aren't running, and there's different personalities and different issues that are going on. And I actually thought, so I'm like, oh my goodness, she's actually weak. I think this is probably the only place in the entire country where you actually have a chance to defeat an extremist because of how close it is. And her, I say that her and Marjorie Taylor Greene are the leaders of this angertainment industry, kind of yelling and shouting and not really focusing on their job. And I thought that I thought it would require a moderate, pragmatic, pro-business Democrat from anywhere to be able to get into a race and build a coalition. And my mom coined this term, she calls it the pro-normal party. So I thought that I could build like this pro-normal party coalition. I knew it was going to be hard, and it was, to get by the primary, but we're all united. Sol Sandoval from Pueblo was the other main candidate in the Democratic Party. I won by 290 votes out of 50,000. But I made it very clear during the primary and after that we're going to have to unify as a party, and I'm super honored and excited. Not only is Alex Walker, but Sol's working with us on the campaign, and she's been a great asset for us. And I see her almost every week, because almost every week I'm in Pueblo, Colorado. And so I thought what it got me fired up about is I just don't like this extremism, and I thought that a more pragmatic approach, ranchers and farmers are super pragmatic, and I thought that I could try to at least offer that to the Democratic Party and see and I made the case in the Democratic Party I could build a coalition because there's just not enough Democrats in the district to do so. And I just knew in my gut, I think about 40% of the Republican Party wants their party back. Gets back to the normal conversations that, we all know Republicans and, there's a lot of good ones around. But the loudest part of that Republican Party has kind of been taken over by that whole Trumpism stuff and that angertainment stuff. But I thought I could build this coalition. I've believed for a year that I need about 10% of our prior voters. And the reason we're tied statistically in polling now is because I've earned the trust of a bunch of Republicans. And so that's what kind of got me in, and that's kind of what we're executing now, and it's been great. It's been hard, but we're here.
Well, let's say you're successful. And
Yeah.
what are you going to do as a member of Congress?
So the number one thing I talk about, and I mentioned this even in the Democratic primary, is that from a method, and there's issues to get involved in, I want to go join this Problem Solvers Caucus, and it's a caucus of 58 members of the House of Representatives. Now, I think the Problem Solvers Caucus should have everyone, because if you're not going to solve problems, what are you going to do? It's made up of 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans. And by their own statute, they have to have an equal amount of members from either side of the House. And the very first infrastructure bill came from the Problem Solvers Caucus, and the very first COVID relief package came from there. And I do believe when we have to tackle all these really hard issues, whether it's immigration or healthcare or anything else like that, it's probably the math is going to say it's going to have to come from a bipartisan manner. So that's the method of which I'm going in there. Inflation and the economy is the number one issue that people are talking about. And I'm not one of these people that say, you elect me and I'm going to get rid of inflation. What I do say is I've spent, 11 years traveling the world focused on global interest rates, and I understand that pretty well, and I've had a fairly good run, not a perfect run, but a pretty good run in the local community being the business owner, and I think I can at least be a good listener and offer some advice and some conversations with that. Water is perennial, the number one issue outside of some longer than temporary, but water is really, really big, and that's fairly unique to western Colorado. As some of you know, and Ann knows very, very well, the water that falls within 10 miles of here is like providing the water for 40 million people in California and Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, and so we have that. Even Baja California, northern Baja California, is getting the water from that falls down from the bells. And so, and this is my case about water. It is about as unpartisan as it gets. every serious Republican legislature or community or civic leader will sit down and have a conversation about water. We obviously have a huge climate crisis on our hands. Water, to me, is the way we bring a lot of diversity together and talk about it. And then once we realize they don't have red horns, we don't have blue horns, we can expand the conversation from water to some other things, soil health and other things that ag and ranching are. And water is the lifeblood of our community, whether it's for the resort community, whether it's for ag, or whether it's for ranching. In the conversation, I tell people, at some point we have this 100-year national compact of water that kind of starts in the headwaters of Colorado. And at some point, it's coming up for conversation. There's some people in D.C., the Bureau of Reclamation, which oversees this multi-state compact. They're starting to kind of raise some questions about, hey, guys, you need to start figuring out how to use less water and what type of agreement do you want to come up with. So when I'm in front of the Grand Junction Chamber of Commerce and Pueblo Chamber of Commerce, my question is, at some point there could be 52 people from the state of California sitting across the table, because that's how many representatives they're going to have next year, from 8 of us from Colorado. And I just point blank ask them, who do you want sitting down at that table talking about water, representing you, your business, your family, and your community? I just kind of make a pure competency play.
Yeah.
And I think most people realize that while there might be some skill sets that the current representative have, sitting down for serious negotiations in a bipartisan manner and building consensus on a multi-state jurisdictional level is really not probably her strong suit. And I'm trying to make my case that I do that. And so that's what's working. So the water thing is really, really important. My number one ask would be to get on some type of committee in D.C. that's focused on water. Education and healthcare. Now, those are two huge issues out there. I'm really focused on the rural aspects of education and the rural aspects of healthcare. And, I think our district actually has more in common with rural Florida and rural Oregon and rural Maine than we do with Denver. And one of the things that I've learned traveling this whole district, there's a lot of I'm not sure animosities, or there's a lot of frustration that Colorado is a very Denver-centric conversation going on. So I think there's 100 members of the state legislature between the Senate and the House, and only 6 or 7 or 8 of them of the 100 are actually from rural ag areas. And beef is one of our top, if not the top export that we have here. And we're feeding the world and with produce and beef and poultry and other elements, and energy is important. And so I think a lot of people just feel like there's this rural urban divide that's happening. And so to me, it's the rural aspects of education to make sure that the people that are in Alamosa and Pagosa Springs and La Junta have the same opportunities that those in Cherry Creek and Denver and Aspen and Crested Butte do as well. And when COVID started, I obtained my substitute teaching license. I think kids need to be in school almost at all time. And I spent time with pre-K4, which was great. My wife's the president of our school board. I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and so we're very big into education. And you hear that those education opportunities need to be the same for a lot of people.
Yeah, I want to jump in here real quick. So what are the issues? I know one of the issues with the rural education is a lot of those rural schools in Colorado have gone to 4-day weeks from 5 days. What other kind of issues are you aware of or hoping to be able to address or solve?
Yeah, well, on education, the last 6 days of the primary, my son Felix, so Felix is supposed to be a junior in high school. He's actually taking he's taking a gap year as a 16-year-old kid, and he's working full time in the campaign. And so we're having this incredible 20,000-mile father-son road trip bonding experience. And he's doing the work of a 30-year-old. He's in charge of all volunteer coordinators, which has been really, really great. And he's in conversations at the adult level with everybody. But we actually, the last 6 days of the campaign in the primary, we went to 54 towns in 6 days and 1,900 miles, and we went to the school districts of each one of those to take a picture just to say, hey, listen, I care about education. And I was pleasantly surprised that the vast majority of the school buildings are actually in really great shape, including a lot of some of the more poorer parts of the district. The problem is the teacher pay is a disaster. I think we all agree there's a lot of great things about Colorado. The funding for high school and elementary school and the funding at college level and second post-college, post-high school is a disaster. It's just not good. And this is a Tabor conversation that we all know. And so these teachers' pay is really, really important. And so there are a lot of places that are 4-day a week. Part of it is that you hear some places where the teachers actually need to get a second job and they need to get a second job and they need 3 days versus 2 days to do that work, which is a horrible thing to hear.
Yeah.
Some people are talking about the 4-day week is just kind of where the teachers want to be. And I understand that, but I'm a big believer that kids need to be in the school district, especially for those families that really need the help. And during COVID, you heard these horrible stories of one or both parents working, hourly wages, and the 9-year-old daughter's taking care of the 6-year-old son at home while the parents are out working. And so I'd much prefer that we have a 5-day-a-week program. But, at the end of the day, I do believe the local communities need to come up with their conversations about how, with their parents and their families and their school boards, about how they want to operate. But there are a tremendous amount of 4-day-a-week school programs. I wish it was 5, but for a couple of different reasons, it's 4.
Yeah. And one other, because you mentioned the visiting all the schools. So tell me a little bit about traveling the state. Was there an issue that you thought was important that turned out to be a non-issue? Were there issues that you hadn't even been aware of that emerged?
Yeah, what was the surprise that you learned?
And did Felix have fun?
Yeah, no, Felix had a great time. I mean, listen, I've done 20,000 miles. And when I start here in Aspen and I drive down to Denver through Pueblo and I come back along the San Luis Valley up in Cortez and Grand Junction and even hit up there, it's 12 or 13 or 14 or 1,500 miles. And I don't miss many aspects about when I lived in New York City, but I think there's a New York City congressperson that can walk their district in 5 hours. And it takes 9 hours to drive from point to point, from southeast Colorado to northwest. One thing that there wasn't anything shocking on issues. Because everyone kind of talks about the same conversations about health, the rural aspects of it. One thing that was surprising is how frustrated at the local level they are. They call it the great state of Denver. Like, there's just a lot of frustration that it's so Denver-centric. And a lot of the people in the rural and small towns, even in Pueblo, kind of just feel left out. On the positive side, one of the commonalities I took away is that whether you're living in Aspen or La Junta or Nucla, people want to live in a pretty small community to feel like they're kind of bought into that community, and so they run into people at the grocery store and at the bar and the bowling alley. And even in Grand Junction, even though it's 100,000 people there, you get a feel like it's a fairly small town, and people, it's obviously diverse. There's been a huge influx of retirees coming from California and Denver as well. In Pueblo, it reminds me of a very Midwestern town. I grew up in Minneapolis after my 5 years in northeastern Montana, and it's just about kind of hardworking, industrial, and even everyone's related to everyone in Pueblo. It's a diverse community. There's a huge Latino community. There's a huge Slavic community that goes back to the steel mill days. Irish and Italian Americans, and there's a big union base down there, and so that's kind of it's a huge hodgepodge in Pueblo. It's been really interesting to try to kind of navigate your way through that great community. But everyone kind of just likes that. They talk about living in a small town, even in a town of 150,000 people or 100,000 people. There's Pueblo West as well, and so the commonality of we're all kind of trying to be in this together, but there is this diversity, and it's hard. I mean, you have some of the rural county in the country. Is down in southeast Colorado, right? And then you have Picken County, which is doing, we have our mental health issues, we have our health issues, we have issues. I share that as well. But from a monetary, we have the same budget as Pueblo, Colorado, Aspen, Colorado. We have 7,500 people. We have to look after 25 or 30,000 people because of our tourist base and Ann as well. But Pueblo's 120,000 people, and we have the same budget. And it's a little, so it's a little sheepish to get into some of these conversations. But I think I'm pretty humble. Like, hey, why don't you just do what Aspen does? You have all this money. That's not how it works. But the housing is the number one thing that I probably learned. I knew that it was a year ago starting to be a real problem. But when I drive down to some of the least dense areas in the country, and I see all this land, those of us from Picken County are going to say, how in the world can you have a housing problem if you have all this land? We don't have the land, and that's our problem. Down there's just conversations that city councils and county commissioners haven't had to have until a couple of years ago. They didn't have a housing crisis, and now they are. And so the thing I've learned is Grand Junction and Alamosa, 10,000 people, 9,000 people, that's how epidemic this housing crisis has been. And I say, if you don't have stable housing, it's hard to have a stable life. And that resonates with a lot of people.
That's very true. You mentioned a couple of things in the course of talking about a little bit of your history and what's come to mind. You mentioned that you know a fair amount about international banking, time in New York. These are teasers to me of I know you as a local guy.
Yeah.
But before you were local to here, where were you local, and what did you do prior to being a city councilman and a candidate?
Speaking of local, I'm hoping that when I win, I can actually show up to whoever I'm supposed to show up to and be deemed a local of Aspen, Colorado. That's going to be my number one goals. Yeah, and so, I grew up ski racing in Minneapolis. That's how I ended up at the University of Colorado Boulder. I was going to race. I got hurt. I stayed for obvious reasons. Had a lot of fun, too much fun that I don't want to talk about in front of my kids. And I started spending a little bit of time up here in the mountains and realized this Roaring Fork Valley was a cool place, even kind of in the late 80s, and sometime I'd hope to come back. I went off to New York City after graduating from Boulder in '90 on a bit of a whim with a best friend of mine who I grew up with in Minneapolis. He was chasing a girl. And I'm like, okay, I'll go out there. And I wanted to get involved in some kind of banking thing, and nobody wanted to hire anybody from Colorado. It was all these kind of East Coast fancy schools. And so I waited tables for about a year, and it was a lot of fun. And then I eventually started working on one of the very first socially responsible investing funds that was started in the early '90s. And at that time, there weren't a lot of proactive industries or companies to invest in. It was mostly avoiding things that people wanted to avoid to honor kind of their values with their ability to generate money and funds. And then, I was on the 100th floor of the World Trade Center in the end of February 1993, and that was the first terrorist attack that happened there. There was a truck bomb in the parking lot.
Right.
And kind of went through that whole experience. I think about 6 or 7 people died and a lot injured. I was literally on the 101st floor, and I was stuck on the roof of the World Trade Center for hours on some Friday afternoon. Ended up I did that for a couple of years, and I ended up going to work in the world of interest rates and foreign exchange, currency trading. And so I spent 7 or 8 years traveling the world in Asia and Latin America and Middle East and Africa, working on and spending time with foreign ministers and central bankers. And so I worked on these currency markets and spent a lot of time again in Asia and Africa, based out of New York for a couple British banks. And so I was just traveling around. I went to about 40 or 50 countries. I did business in over 50, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, just focused on kind of all these currencies that were more of these less big world countries. End of the day, I went through a lot of 9/11 funerals. I worked in 7 World Trade Center for a couple of years. That building fell down in the evening of 9/11, and that whole 9/11 experience kind of shook me.
Were you still in New York then?
Yeah, I was in New York. I was working up in Midtown, so I was a couple miles away. But I was on the phone at 8:52 in the morning talking to a buddy of mine who was probably one of the first 50 or 100 people killed, because he was on the 78th floor where the first plane went in. The phone went dead, and there was a report like some small plane had crashed into the road, like a small passenger plane had crashed in, and then like whatever X amount of minutes later, the second plane, and everyone kind of realized this was not a random act that happened. And just kind of went through that whole surreal experience for months, and then I figured, maybe I should just pack up my bags and clear my mind for a year, and I figured I would take the winter of 01, 02 off and kind of just do a little ski bumming. And I ended up meeting a gal down the road in Vail and convinced her that Aspen would be a better place for us to build community and raise a family and get into work. And so we moved here in the fall. Moved here November 15th, 2003, and came with high expectations, and they've been vastly exceeded with just how great the community is. And it's there's a lot more economic diversity, I think, than a lot of people realize in this town.
Well, you mentioned the 93 World Trade Center attack and then 9/11. And then also that you were at the Boston Marathon with the bomb. Do you think those 3 very traumatic events have informed your desire to get into community service elected position?
Yeah, I mean, so my other brush with death was in 2013. I crossed the Boston Marathon finish line, and then about, I think like 15 or 20 minutes later, the bomb went off right at the bar I was supposed to actually be at to meet some friends, but I wanted to go get food, and so I was actually at an Indian restaurant, which is the best way to fuel up after running a big marathon, for me at least. And so, yeah, I mean, just kind of, you just get these little things that happen in your life, and it's just like, hey, let's just make sure. Even when I was in the heart of banking, I try to do volunteer stuff and civic stuff, and it's hard in New York, whatever. But that comes from my parents that have been supportive and have done a lot of good stuff themselves. My dad was, he worked for the Public Health Service in the late 60s on Fort Peck Indian Reservation, became an OBGYN for 50 years, started in 1972, had bomb threats in Minneapolis when he was starting his practice. In his last couple of years of his being a doctor, he worked for Planned Parenthood just to make sure the next generation of healthcare providers had a chance to learn from someone who had a lot of experience. And my mom went back to law school, and I started high school, actually, and she became a mediator, did a lot of stuff in family law, and that she's been active in community activism and democratic politics and everything else like that. But there were some kind of scary things that happened in my life, and it's just, hey, just make sure that you're spending most of your time working on things that are mostly important to you. And that's community and my family and trying to make the place a little bit better.
And then you mentioned growing up on the reservation. So what are the prominent, important tribal issues in District 3?
Yeah, and so...
and how have you
Yeah, so no,
interact?
Tawak and Ignacio, I've been down there each one once, and we're going back again one or two more times. So basically at Four Corners, you have the Ute tribe, and then you have the Southern Ute tribe. They're different tribes. Cousins, if you will. The Southern Utes have been incredibly active economically. They're not only do they have the gaming industry down there, but they're into energy production, not only on their land, but they actually are doing energy production, I think deep sea wise as well, and they've been very, very focused on business. It's still, COVID has been a disaster to the native tribes, without a doubt, and they're still kind of suffering from that as well. And that experience of I was 5 when I left, and I remember a little bit, but I'll guarantee you, the Native American population in the late 60s in northeastern Montana was not treated very well, and I can vouch for that, and so can my parents about how that happened. And things are definitely better, but if you just look at the demographics on education and health and welfare, it's still a struggle. But they're incredibly, sovereignty is really, really important to them. They deserve and need a seat at the table when it comes to water. Water is very important to them as well, and they have some water rights that go a lot longer than 1922, when a lot of the water rights started. And they've been on that land for a long time, and so I'm very respectful, and I'm learning a lot. But whether it's the tribal or the Latino community or Anglo, it is about job security, it is about safety in schools, safety in the communities, and making sure that healthcare is accessible, not just how close the caregiver is, but can you afford that bill when you get there? And so the sovereignty of those two tribes are really, really important, and they're economically viable. They're doing a lot of great stuff up down there, and I think it's really important, not just from economics, but from a holistic standpoint, to make sure that they're treated with the respect that they deserve, and that always hasn't been the case. I know things have changed over recently, but that land is really important. But they're doing really well economically on some aspects, and some other aspects they still need help, especially when it comes to education opportunities. I know that a lot of people down there are trying to work on making sure that those kids graduate from high school and get into some type of post-high school education, whether it's a 4-year degree or whether it is a trade school. Where they can go on and get into some type of apprentice to work on and try to keep as many of the young people that want to have economic viability to stay on the land that their ancestors have had for a long time.
Well, there's education, there's water. You've mentioned these as important. We haven't talked much about infrastructure.
Yeah.
And how systems, things that the federal government actually has a lot of control over.
Yeah.
How do we build infrastructure systems, and how would you work with trying to put that together for the far-flung 3rd Congressional District? Yeah,
one of the reasons I think that our campaign is resonating, and again, we started down 7 points, we're pretty much tied, is because we've been pointing out that she's just not focused on this district. She's voted against hundreds of millions of dollars that could have come back from D.C. in this district. And I think that one of the number one issues that you do as a representative is, listen, we all pay a lot of taxes that go to D.C. And if you're not there fighting to bring some part of those things back, it's not like it's not being refunded to the individuals. That money, some part of that money is going to end up in Denver, going to end up in Detroit, going to end up in rural Maine. And so one of my big goals is to go there and actually try to get as much money possible to come back to this district for infrastructure, whether it's the human infrastructure of health, education, and welfare, or whether it's just the roads and bridges. And I-70, as we all know, is a huge mess. And she's voted against bill after bill after bill. She's voted against the veterans funding 80% of the time. And so my job is to go back there and try to fight really hard to bring back funds to get reinvested in this community. She's proposed 39 bills. 0 of them have got out of committee. A lot of them don't have anything to do. They're kind of part of that angertainment identity bills that she's proposing that aren't really about, hey, how do we make sure the rural aspects of healthcare get looked after? You guys can vouch for this. All this talk of 5G, I'd be very happy with 1G in CD3. It's unbelievable. One of the biggest surprises Reid has had is it's 54,000 square miles. I don't think I've ever had a conversation longer than 20 minutes in the district that hasn't been dropped. And we not only do we need broadband, we just need better cell service to make sure that can get around. As we want to be more efficient in irrigation, we need to make sure that we have the latest and greatest irrigation systems, which are tied to weather and Wi-Fi and connectivity. The next generation, the current generation of combines and tractors are Wi-Fi enabled, and without that type of connection, that's a problem. Telemedicine is really important. Obviously, we all love to be right in front of our healthcare provider one-on-one, but there's times where it's better or it can't be done. And if we don't have the broadband possible to have those video conferences with our healthcare providers, education, as much as I talk about I want kids in school, there's a lot of ways to help people that are ahead of the game or need to be caught up that are based on having good Wi-Fi or good cell service or good satellite. And so that connectivity is really, really important. And our Congresswoman continues to vote down those laws. She comes back now and starts sending up brochures that she's she's very proud to be at the ribbon cutting thing. But we have her on record cutting, not supporting all this stuff. And so it's bringing back funds to this district, and it's kind of like getting them in front of the local Board of County Commissioners and these county health departments. Picken has a great one. There's 27 other really good ones as well. I'd love to see block grants just come into the county health departments, bypass Denver with all due respect, and just let the local people on the ground figure out between mental health and physical health, emotional, where those monies should be funded. And I think that's the conversation that's getting people really, really excited about where we're going.
You've had success with endorsements. Why don't you tell us about?
Yeah, no, it's been great. So when I first started this campaign, I'm like, and it was hard for me to convince the Democratic Party to listen that even if there's 110% turnout, which is not going to be on Democrats, we can't win. We have to build a coalition. And so about a month ago, we launched this Republicans for Frisch website. And we have some testimonials from some boots on the ground members of Rifle and Grand Junction that are proud Republicans or they left the Republican Party once Trump came in, and they kind of want that party back. We also got endorsed by Don Coram, who obtained 36% of the primary vote against Lauren Boebert. And Rena Zimmerman also ran against Lauren Boebert in the Republican primary. So she's endorsed us now. So there were basically 6 people on the ballot in the partisan conversations at the end of June. Lauren Boebert got 45% of the vote. The other 5 of us got 55%, and we're all united. We got endorsed not only the Durango Herald newspaper, which is pretty progressive down there, but we also got endorsed by the Grand Junction newspaper, which is not the bastion of liberalism in the press. One of the reasons I got into this race back in November, I looked a year ago November. Dennis Anderson, who's the publisher of the Delta Montrose Independent paper, he wrote an editorial November 30th of 2021 saying, hey, we had supported Representative Boebert at the start. She was a breath of fresh air. She was going to shake things up. But she's let us down. And I don't have the exact quotes, but basically she's been an embarrassment. She's not doing the job. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, if the conservative press has lost faith in that person, that's where I think this coalition could be built, and we're working on that. And so we also have the support of Russ George, who's a 4th-generation Rifle resident. He was a recent Republican Speaker of the House down in the state capitol, ran CDOT as well. We're building relationships with him. There's a couple really important Republican people in Grand Junction that have gone as far as they put the yard sign, our yard sign in their yard, but they're respectfully just don't want to get involved in a public level, which is all fine. We were endorsed by this No Labels organization, which kind of helped launch this Problem Solvers Caucus. We've been endorsed. I got endorsed by the unions, even in the primary, and we even got endorsed by the coal miners as well. We've been endorsed by the National Security Leaders of America, a bunch of former retired generals and admirals that really want to have these conversations to make sure that, I wish foreign affairs came up more about it, but as, again, people are just trying to figure out how to make those monthly payments on cars and healthcare and mortgages, so I can appreciate why foreign affairs kind of falls apart, but my plug about that is when the U.S. doesn't stay engaged, the world's the worst place off. We need to do that with with humility, whatever, but it's important to stay engaged. We got endorsed by, so Andrew Yang, who started the Forward Party, he merged with this other organization called Renew America Movement. Renew America Movement was also an organization I saw a year ago that was anti-Trump Republicans. Those organizations have merged. We were endorsed by them as well. We're working on some other papers that might come out in the next week or so. And then just a lot of local, I get all these letters, and there was also 20 conservatives, a letter to the editor the day that the Grand Junction editorial came out saying, we're all conservatives, we don't agree with Frisch on everything, but we can get rid of him in 2 years, and we need to stop this madness. We need to find someone in that seat who's actually going to focus on the jobs of the people and the businesses in the community. So we're building this bipartisan pro-normal party. I've said for 20 years, if there was a get stuff done party, I'd be in that party. And that party's not doing very well right now in the country, and especially not doing very well in this district. And people want the circus to stop. And those are the comments that I've felt for a long time that resonate with a lot of people. So we're honored to have all these endorsements.
Yeah.
It is really wonderful. It raises this kind of how does one then go about representing such a diverse area? I mean, we all have our personal points of view, and then as a pragmatist, you say, I may believe in this narrow thing, but to get something done, I have to move over here.
It's going to be hard. I mean, I have some of the most super progressive liberals are frustrated with me that I'm not talking about their issues, and the pragmatic bipartisan people understand me a little bit more, and as I'm trying to earn the votes of these necessary independents or Republicans, are very concerned that I'm just going to cave in to just toe the Democratic line. I keep on telling everyone, listen, I'm hired and fired by the people of the district, not by Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden or whoever else is going to be in leadership in the Democratic Party. But it's a big tent, and it's not always easy. It hasn't been easy to do that, but I'll say this, Reid, there's a lot of hard things about running. The easiest thing for me to run is what I expressed as a dad and a husband, as a small business owner, like a year ago, before I even thought about doing this, is I made it very clear in the Democratic Party of who I am, and I'm having the same conversations in the general election. So I didn't veer left to win the Democratic primary, then I'm veering right, because that's just not who I am. And everything's on, like every word I've said since February 1st has been on tape. And so I'm running who I am. And I think I lunched the other day with someone who's really very active in politics at a national level, and goes, sometimes it's just the right time for the right person in the right location to come along. And with humility, I just think that this pragmatic, bipartisan, consensus-building, no-nonsense person that has some deep rural roots and some experience to try to come together and build this coalition. And I think that's why people are resonating. I think people do believe what I'm saying. And being authentic is important, and being sincere is important, and they see that, and I think that resonates with some people. But no, it's going to be, it's a wide variety of people. But that's what it's going to take to continue to see CD3 have a seat at the table in Washington, D.C.
We only have about a minute left, but I want to make sure we covered everything that you wanted to be able to say.
Yeah. So listen, if everybody wants to learn more or send in a little bit of money, I'll just make my one plug. It's adamforcolorado.com. com, Adam at forcolorado.com, for those of you who are Republicans for Frisch. But I just want to end out by thank you very much. We electeds get a lot of gratitude for running, but it's the boots on the ground that's really, really important. So I just want to give a shout out to all those that have, well, Felix and a team of 125 college kids around the country have made 375,000 phone calls. There's been 40,000 postcards that have been mailed out. There's been a tremendous amount of door knocking that has happened to try to see this movement happen. But I'll say this above everything: just please vote, please vote, please vote. I don't care who you're voting for, me or someone else. Just democracy is fragile. It's really important. I am a big believer that every vote counts, every vote matters. So just please get out there and vote. We have some of the safest elections in the country in Colorado, and we have the second highest participation in Colorado after Minnesota. Which is great, and maybe we'll take over my home state of Minnesota in this thing, whatever. But we're seeing voter turnout, and I appreciate you allowing the chance to have a dialogue beyond 175 characters on a tweet or a 30-second soundbite. So thank you for all you guys do as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And before we conclude, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we have reached out in multiple ways to Representative Boebert and have not yet heard back, but look forward to the opportunity to speak with her as well. That's the end of another Probeline. Hope it was helpful, and please get out and vote.